so everything looks wonky to me. But anyway, and driving here was really interesting. My aim is to answer questions and talk about the difference between sex, gender, and sexuality, and where they come into play and how they're different from each other. Open to any questions, please. Just shout them out. Let me know what you're thinking. First, let's start with something kind of easy that I think most people have discussed, and that's sexual orientation. Can anyone shout out some different sexual orientations? Lesbian? Yes. Gay?
Bisexual.
Bisexual?
Pansexual.
Pansexual?
Asexual.
Say again?
Asexual.
Asexual?
Straight.
Straight? Say again?
Scoliosexual.
What?
Scoliosexual.
How do you spell that?
S-K-O.
Sorry. Yell. I can't hear you.
S-O. No, S-K-O-L-I-O. And then sexual.
Okay. What else?
Sapiosexual.
Sapiosexual? Yep. Okay. Well, okay, so we got different sexualities. And how do we understand the sexualities? What's basic understanding for what these mean? Lesbian?
Like women likes a woman.
Woman likes women. Woman is both emotionally and sexually stimulated by women, right? Gay? Like men. It's also an umbrella term, tends to refer to both men and women. Right. Bisexual? Attracted to both. Now, there's two interpretations of bisexual. One is where there's a recognition of male and female only, and there's also one that says that bisexual knows no gender boundaries. My favorite description for it is they're a lover of souls. But pansexual?
Someone that loves everybody.
Someone that, same thing, no gender boundaries on that. Asexual?
No sexual attraction.
No sexual attraction. There's a caveat to that. Sexual attraction comes with deep affection for,
Very sexual.
yeah,
Or demi.
demisexual. Does that mean the same thing?
It's one part of the asexual. It's the
what?
the demi is the have to form a close bond first.
So no sexual attraction except if you're
Very,
in a
very
close bond with someone.
With your person. Straight,
That's the demi.
Opposite.
opposite sex, or not same sex, right? Okay. Scoliosexual?
Only attracted to non-binary identities.
Only attracted to non-binary identities.
Well,
I don't even know what that means.
Since there was that.
That's great.
So non-binary.
We will talk about non-binary. And sapiosexual.
Attracted to someone with intelligence.
Yeah, attracted to intelligence. And there's like a whole list. Yeah. So being sexually attracted to it. And the thing is that these aren't just, this isn't just sex, this is also like the emotional bonding that comes with it as well. And so is there a general understanding in the room about the existence of these things on, like, you could be sapiosexual and bisexual or pansexual. So some of these characteristics can cover one another, as well as that they kind of exist on a continuum as well. And so that given the opportunity to express ourselves and to kind of explore what interests us, we might start out experiencing the world heterosexual, but then realize that may not be where we're most comfortable. Did I see a hand come up? Yes.
On the aspect of not just the sexuality, but there's also for the romantic aspect of it, there's also aromantic.
Aromantic, yes. There's aromantic meaning no more romance exists. Not that it's non-romantic, it just doesn't exist in there.
To them, it's more friendships, close bonds as far as that.
Good, thank you.
I was going to also ask about the polysexual side.
Uh-huh.
Does that count? around us.
How are you describing, how are you defining polysexual?
Meaning that you want more than one person.
Okay, so that's,
That's
polysexual or polyamory?
Yeah, polyamory.
Okay, a slightly different conversation, but a lot of our general attitudes in American culture is that you can only love one person in a romantic way. At least you can only do it ethically in a romantic way. In a polyamorous, polysexual way of thinking, you can love more than one and have sexual relationships with more than one ethically as well. All right. So, does any discussion need to go on about the reality of lesbianism and being gay and bisexuality? Does everybody pretty much agree that it exists? Okay.
I didn't know what you meant when you said the reality.
Yeah, that it exists, that it's something that is a lived reality for us. In any case, so we've got that down. So that's actually the easiest one. It's the one that we've had the most conversations about. So moving from that, moving from sexual orientation to sex and gender, we tend to conflate the two things, when in fact they're different. Does anybody know the difference between sex and gender? So I'm not doing all the talking here. I'll let you all talk. Yes.
Gender is how you personally identify. The other is what you're attracted to.
Yeah. Gender is a
Very
personal
simple.
identity, and sex is, sex is not necessarily what you're attracted to, but sex is a label that is given to people. Based on genitalia and other biological factors. Genitalia tends to be the most noticeable of that. So with that in mind, let's stop and think for a second. When we're out on the street and we see a person, within a split second of seeing a person, we make a judgment about whether a person is male or female. How do you make that judgment? What are the cues that you have? Clothing? What's the difference between clothes for male and female?
Like the style of it, like how it's worn. How it's worn.
It's more fitted for females.
Okay, so clothes fit. What else?
Left buttons are female, right buttons are male.
You're very observant.
Yeah, when you wear both, you know, you just say.
Yeah, shop, you don't know, what the sound person. You know, it's male or female. All the buttons on the left. I get to buy it, $2.
Okay.
Well, a dress is being way generic.
If you see a
dress, you associate that with female.
Okay. What else?
Color, the color of the clothes.
Color clothes. So what is color? How do we identify color?
Typically think of pastels or, yeah.
Like pink, normally pastels are female colors, and the darker spectrum of colors.
My boyfriend has pink shirt.
Okay.
That's not true.
Well, but generally,
We start early with that one. Yeah. Pink for girls, normal. We start real early with that.
I mean, even from Water Young, you got the neckties and the bow ties. Those represent masculinity as well. Clothing, even when we speak about now males are wearing powder for their complex. You think of makeup being feminine and not masculine.
Yeah. Okay, so makeup or lack of it, hair, hair,
facial hair.
hair, facial hair.
Don't get started on that.
That's why I tried to zip.
It's an ongoing battle.
It gets worse as you get older.
Anyone ever see this great cartoon that shows a little girl go up to her mom and says, "Mom, oh my God, you've got hair on your face. Am I going to grow up to be just like you? Oh my gosh!" And she's, "No, I'm the only freak in this world." Good luck. All right, All right.
It's funny because kids do that. I mean, I have some look gives us some facial hair and I mean, the same thing. It
Yeah.
could be a woman with a hormone problem.
Yeah.
And sensitive.
Facial hair. What else?
Shoes?
Shoes. Okay. Oh, purse.
Voice only.
Purse versus man pouch. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know about man pouches.
Man purse.
Jewelry?
Jewelry.
Tattoos.
I don't know, that's good. You don't know that.
Well, some people have one that expresses their.
What about
You can see a tattoo that
Fingernails?
says something and you know right off.
yeah.
A lot of times too, a lot of females do the bright, colorful, it's very feminine.
Butterflies
butterflies.
versus
I get it,
bells.
do the black shoes a lot of times where it's a very masculine looking color.
Boys. Body hair. Facial hair. Breasts.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even our floral scents, our fragrance, our perfume, our deodorant, secrets for women, right guards for men, soaps,
So we have scents that are
right.
gender. Say again? Undergarments? Undergarments, you usually won't see those at a restaurant. There's a few situations in which you do see. Alright, so we've got some interesting ideas. Alright, you all actually picked out some indications of sex or gender based on physical characteristics, and some that are based on cultural characteristics.
Can we add the way that people walk?
The way people walk.
Mannerisms?
Mannerisms? Okay. So, ones that tend to get most strongly associated with sex, males do this, females do this, are those that are most closely associated with our physical characteristics, our sex, primary and secondary sex characteristics. So, body hair, whether or not someone has breasts, these types of things. All those things that we experience for puberty, how deep your voice is. Now, off the top of our heads, do we know people who don't conform to that?
Yes.
And the only reason that those things get termed problems is because we have, as a society, have determined that women are supposed to look a certain way and men are supposed to look a certain way, or that males look a certain way and females look a certain way. When in fact, the chances are that's just the way that individual's body works. You have different hormonal, different hormonal situations for everybody, and so it is expressed phenotypically in different ways. And then when it doesn't conform, it becomes a problem socially for us because it's not considered socially acceptable for women to have too much body hair. It's not considered socially acceptable for men's voices to be too high. These other things, clothes, undergarments, the scents that we wear, the type of jewelry we wear, these things are cultural. And they're the social expectations of what we expect men and women to look like, to present themselves as. And when you walk out in the world and people know that you are female, yet you are dressing what is generally considered normatively male, or vice versa, it tends to be problematic. And then there are some folks who you can't tell whether they are male or female and whether they're dressing male or female, because we have some really great fashions these days that let people express this neutrality. And then this becomes problematic for people because it is natural for us to want to categorize people.
Pat on Saturday Night Live.
I just want to know.
And so what we then recognize then is sex is the biological aspect of male, female, and other, and gender is the social aspect of it. that social aspect is both a psychological aspect and a social construction that a cultural thing that's imposed upon us. So I have these really great pictures that I was going to give a handout, but my computer crashed, and so let me draw this real quick for you.
The cultural aspect would go into everything. I mean, if a girl is more of a tomboy and it doesn't want to dress up in the frilly dresses her mom wants her to wear, but rather wear jeans and climb trees, it translates into everything that happens to her at school. It translates into everything that happens to her in what career she's expected to have. You know, it's why we're having to market science, technology, engineering, and math to girls and women, because there's been a social construct to keep them away.
Right.
But this isn't for girls. Girls aren't good.
How many of you heard that word?
I heard it.
And the girl that was good at it in class, or the girls that were, they were an anomaly. Yeah.
They were.
Girls will play games, stuff like that, they get teased a lot, they do online games.
Yes. Yeah, girl gamers, that's an entire revolution that's going on there. They've always existed, yet they're a group that's not really recognized.
Yeah.
So let me share this real quick with you. We grew up understanding sex, that biological aspect, as there being two of them, right? Male and female. Defined how? XY and XX, right? And people who don't know about the biology of this tend to assume that that's the only way in which those things line up. In fact, they line up in a number of ways. They don't only line up as XX and XY. But we understand the XY as being male. And then we assume all kinds of things at birth from seeing a penis, right? We assume that they're heterosexual, that they're going to be attracted to women, and that they're going to naturally like football in this culture. And for the XX,
I would say, like, I used to work at daycare, and, like, I worked with, like, 6 people, like, infants. And, like, a boy infant would, like, look at, like, a girl infant, and they'd be like, oh, are you in love? And I'm like, he's just pooping, like, calm down.
yes,
You guys understand this?
infants fall in love with each other. And the XX is female. Oops, I spelled something else apparently. Female. Okay. However, there is intersex, which is defined a number of different ways, but we're going to define it using the chromosomes this way. We have XO, we have XXX, we have XXY, and we have XYY, and there are a couple of others too. Some of these are never noticed. Some people go throughout their entire lives and never know. Some of them are expressed phenotypically, so you'll have ambiguous genitalia. You won't be able to tell if the person right off is if their genitalia is male genitalia or female genitalia, according to our definitions. Some of these have some significant behavioral and some learning disabilities associated with them as well.
Would this be your people born with both?
They're born with these chromosome characteristics, and they may you may have somebody who, if you study the genetics of it, and the genetics, the chromosome combination, a set of several different types of hormonal levels, as well as the way the genitalia looks, a whole number of things go into play as to whether somebody will medically be determined to be male or female. And then you also have those that are ambiguous. A term no longer used was hermaphrodite, which was both male and female. Not used anymore, we use intersex. Yes?
I recently met a nurse out here in Fort Worth. She said her hospital is the one that when a baby's sex can't be determined by the attending physician, they send the baby to her hospital, and she said the biggest one they just celebrated, was one when the parents said, can we put you? And they said, yeah, you can put it on the birth certificate. And they said, we're gonna let the child decide.
That's fantastic.
So, and the whole, she said it was like a big celebration at the hospital. They thought the parents were so supportive and so awesome, and, she says the average is about 1 in every 100.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Is that common?
It is. It's as common as natural red hair. Quite honestly.
So you means universal? Is that what you mean?
I don't know what I didn't ask her. I just
know.
thought it was so cool. I was so
Undecided.
excited. Undecided. I think, yeah, undecided.
Undecided.
So,
That's really great. So for the arguments that go on about there being just an XX and XY and as easy as that, it's really not. It's really far more diverse than that. The human experience is far more variable than just these two things. But then like I said, we've conflated these chromosomal combinations and the way it looks with genitalia to an identity. We've decided that there's an entire identity associated with these things. And we've dichotomized those identities to be woman and man. So that's gender. Now, I'm a sociologist. I'm gonna use specific vocabulary here. For sex, male and female. For gender, woman and man. But that's not all there is, right? We recognize that that's not all there is. We tend to think woman as feminine, with characteristics associated with being feminine, and man as being masculine, with characteristics associated with masculine. What are feminine characteristics?
Being soft-spoken.
Soft-spoken, dainty. I'm still walking that. Emotional. Cooperative. Smaller in stature. How about masculine? What are masculine characteristics? Competitive. Strong. Aggressive. So we recognize that we've taken personal characteristics, like personality characteristics, and applied them to concepts of woman and man, feminine and masculine. Are there any women in the room who don't identify with all of these feminine characteristics? How about any men in the room that don't identify with all of those masculine characteristics? It's rare to see, but you know. So what we then recognize that these characteristics that are culturally imbued, they're imputed upon us, that this is the way we're supposed to be, have incredible influence over how others treat us, how we perceive ourselves, and then ultimately politically, they have huge influence. I'm going to wrap this up fairly quickly, but I also have a Venn diagram here for the concepts of masculine and feminine and transgender to understand the identity, the gender identity. And so I've got a masculine male here, and that is a person who sees himself, who has the physical characteristics of being male, and they also project the cultural characteristics of being male. And I want to point out that the cultural characteristics of masculinity are not the same. They are not universal. They're not the same across all cultures. Same thing with being a woman, with femininity. They're not the same across all cultures. Furthermore, not all cultures only see two genders and sexes. There are other cultures out there that have traditionally recognized multiple sexes and multiple genders, and recognizing that they're not the same thing. This is the feminine female. And this, I'm going to call androgynous. I can spell it. Androgynous. Close like that.
Literacy moment. What is androgynous?
Yeah, androgynous is somebody who there's a couple definitions for it. If we're thinking about sex, androgynous would be intersex. If we're thinking about identity, they will neither see themselves as male or female, that they will imbue themselves with
Non-binary.
They're not binary. They see themselves as both. there's a non-binary perspective there. Within, so, and when these things cross, in the center here, you have a transgender identity. Not all people who are transgender have a transgender identity. They may have a transgender experience, they may not. And so it's important to recognize that these perspectives are varied for everybody. Here we have what we call the effeminate male. And this would be the person who physically looks male, but takes on characteristics and personality traits that we tend to assume are feminine. And here we have the masculine female. I don't even know if I can word masculine and female. And so this is just a very simplistic Venn diagram to show how these things come into contact with each other, how they overlap, but how they're definitely not the same thing. And so we understand sex then as a biological concept that we have been taught is a binary thing, but is actually varied. Gender, which our society teaches us is a binary thing as well, but we recognize that it is also varied and that the characteristics associated with gender are culturally constructed. And they've changed over time. And then finally, sexual orientation, who we are attracted to having sex with and having those deep emotional relationships with, those things are separate as well. And so it's far more complicated than the binary that we tend to assume. And that's all I have for explaining the differences. Any questions before I walk?
I do. When you go back to the biological part of it and the XYs and everything, do we feel that the chemicals and stuff in our, it has got to where it's broken our biologicals down to where there are more chromosomes, or is this something that's been forever?
This has existed forever.
And we just never paid attention to it. No one's ever.
It has taken a long time for us to get to the level of scientific knowledge where we recognize these things, but also early on when we did recognize these things, we recognized them as medical problems. And so we've heard the stories of some folks born intersex, where it was determined that their life would be very difficult if they did not specifically look like and identify as either male or female, woman or man. And therefore they had surgeries, multiple surgeries many times, in order to make their genitalia look masculine or look feminine, despite the fact that their identity was something that was developing all by itself without consideration of the surgeries that they had. Some of these situations ended up, very sad and tragic situations of people living lives where their identities didn't match their bodies. However, their life experience was constantly focused on their genitalia, and how difficult it was for them to have normal relationships with people, including themselves. But they've always existed. Yes?
I was going to point out that there's also historical stuff that we can look back at now and recognize. If I'm not mistaken, there is a story in Greek mythology that was a lover of Poseidon that was born female, but he granted, because they wanted to be male, he granted them he turned them male.
Interesting. I don't know that story. That's cool.
Going along with that, what I think is like it's always been this way, but it's that time period, what man is thinking and what they've got with definitions that they put on things, because like she was saying, there are ancient texts that recorded beings that weren't male or female, and they had special places in temples. We just lost so much of that. We don't know what they were, how they were integrated into society then, and so they've done a horrible job.
Whoever was doing the discovery and whoever was writing down the history was all male.
And a lot of times, some of it had to do with Christian moving in, had a tendency to what was considered taboo or
Right, all the older texts of Dionysus are the same way. Very, very much,
Free love kind of thing.
yeah, he wasn't necessarily the one turning views all the time, and some of the older texts are showing that. Now, I'm finding it, but you're right, who wrote the history down has a lot to do with the
And even we've got reliefs still in Greece today that show women with drones. And the men who discovered them call them women with cakes. Now who holds a cake on their side? I'm
Well, I
saying,
mean,
because men didn't know how they were looking at it, they couldn't imagine that the religious leaders were women. And the services were done by women, because it was just not within their understanding.
We come up with all kinds of stories as that explain and justify the situation that we have today. I'll tell you that in a class I was teaching one time, I had a student tell me that her history professor told her that historically women were the carers of the children, and not just because of physically bearing the children, but because their bodies were specifically made to nurture and care for children, because their center of gravity was different from men's. And I said, can you explain that to me? And she said, well, yeah, men's strength is up here, therefore they carry things up here, and their work is up here, and this kind of thing. But women, their center of gravity is closer, therefore their work is here. And I asked her to consider how you carry a football. I'm sorry, his argument didn't fly with me.
Basketball. But their heads.
So, and then there are women still in many countries whose major form of transportation of goods is on their heads. And so you can't tell me that this is a biological reason for nurturing. It's just not. So, anyone else?
You know, when we were talking, you were talking about the Greek and things, there's other religion that has already expound on this concept of transition, gender. There's a remarkable story, and I like to bring this up because the movie Mulan is a perfect example. The true story of the atonement. I want this, but you can't because you're not a guy, and you were blessed, wake up, and now you have this magnificent gift of being a male, so you can receive, and the Father embraces now the Son. So I think it's in history. I just think that we don't speak of it because we don't know how to connect all of the dots and where it derived from, rather than just actually expounding on what's actually there.
See, there's I think they say female now because when they found the body, it was female of one of the Egyptian pharaohs. She literally, everything, all the texts they have found, it's all masculine. She's a pharaoh, not a queen or anything like that. All the stuff, she was buried with the clothes and everything else, she wore a beard. And they're all, she. But the thing is people are starting to realize, maybe they weren't. Maybe even back then, they were transgender, and that's what they wanted to be. They became pharaoh, they didn't want to be female. It was not, but people are like, oh, well, we found the body, and we can look at it, it's female. But yet everything else, if they would not have seen the body or anything like that, all the text sounded male.
And were they doing it because they were openly able to do that, or were they hiding that they were female?
I'm actually not sure.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the
the
biggest
question.
question. Yeah.
Well, they were gods.
So, yeah, I'm not sure the time period.
Yeah, but they were considered gods, so, they,
Well,
whether
one
it was
female,
figured or,
one female pharaoh that I know of
yeah.
was erased
Yeah.
by the
Saint-
pharaoh that came after her. And, I look at it as a feminist, I look at it like,
Yeah.
another patriarch